Hello and welcome to the 60th episode of the Be Life Podcast. We're coming to you from Canton Nazarene Church in Canton, Ohio. I'm Joe. Josh, Zach is here producing all this again as usual. And we want to thank you for spending time with us and coming in and watching this episode with us. Again, we want to ask you that if you're watching us on YouTube, give us a like, give us a comment if you want, but mostly subscribe to us so that we can continue to get this out to more people. Please just hit that subscribe button. And if you're watching us on Spotify and Apple Podcasts or anything else, just follow us so that we can get this out to other people if you like it. Last week, our pastor, Pastor Dan, did a sermon on government. And the sermon was based on submitting to government. And I do a blog on the sermon every week.
Yeah.
I got up at 5, like I usually do, started the blog. 12:30 in the afternoon, I finished it.
Oh my goodness.
You're
You're wrestling with it.
Oh, I wrestled with this I think I had dislocated arms, everything. I wrestled with it because the week before he did Romans 12. Then last week he did Romans 13.
Yeah.
And Romans 12 was, it was basically Romans, therefore I urge you, brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy, to offer your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. Do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. So that's 12.
Mm-hmm.
And it's basically, he's saying, you need to submit to God. Don't conform to the world. Transform your mind, focus on God, offer your body as a living sacrifice. Then he gets to 13. And it says, let everyone be subject to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except which God has established. And I'm like, and then it goes into verse 2. Consequently, whoever rebels against the authority, the government, is rebelling against what God has instituted. So now I don't like authority anyway.
You're a natural born rebel.
Yes. So now I got 2 masters because I'm serving God, but apparently God has ordained government. And I'm thinking to myself, Josh, there's been one government in the history of the world that isn't corrupt, that doesn't get corrupt, doesn't become unjust, doesn't become greedy, doesn't become power hungry, doesn't become authoritarian. But God supposedly authorizes those. And he supposedly ordains those.
That's the way it seems from what Paul's saying in Romans 13.
Yeah. And so how do I submit? How do followers of Christ submit to human governments without conforming to the world? That's the first question. Has there ever been a government on earth that isn't corrupt? We said that. So how do we serve that? And does God warn us about serving 2 masters? So how are governments established by God?
I mean, I thought it was really interesting sitting under this message from Dan, because the reason that he even did a Sunday morning message about our relationship with the government is because we've been working through Paul's letter to the Romans, and Romans 13, the first 2/3, 3/4 of that chapter, infamously just like hangs out on this subject. And the verses there have been taken in or out of context, depending on your interpretation, depending on your hermeneutic, and have been used as a proof text for all sorts of political actions, for social identity markers between individuals and between groups. And so it's become a relatively infamous passage from the Bible. But I found it interesting that Dan didn't just hang out in Romans 13, but he jumped around to a bunch of other places throughout the Old Testament in particular, where it showed men of God, heroes of the faith, who stood up to the government, who opposed unjust law, who opposed unjust leaders, and were praised for it. The Bible sets them up as being heroes.
Yes.
And so it was interesting, right? That our main text we were working through, the bottom line was submit. God put them there. It's a good thing. Don't stir the pot, submit. But every other story that he went to was the opposite message.
Mm-hmm.
And so that alerted me while I was sitting under that sermon, that alerted me to like, this is a very nuanced subject that I don't think the Bible is univocal about. I don't think the Bible says, hey, here is the clear definition of this is the relationship between church and state. Here's how government should work. Here's how participation in governing bodies and government systems should work. Like the Bible just doesn't do that. Instead, it challenges people in specific situations, and it gives wisdom into, again, specific situations to specific people. And so then to reduce that into and to draw out conclusions that we can apply to our lives takes some work. And so I think that you having wrestled with it on Monday is the perfectly appropriate response. I just wanted to start with that.
Yeah.
I don't think it was out of place for you to have sat under a message and then when you're giving a follow-up, be like, this just doesn't sit right with me, and you wrestle with it. And then you mentioned it to me Wednesday and we're talking about it this morning. Like it just hasn't sat right with you. And that makes sense. Honestly, that feels like the only logical conclusion to walk away with is this is tricky.
It did at 12:30, well, somewhere around 11:30. But it literally, I sat there from 5 o'clock till 12:30. 12:30, I submitted it.
Yeah. I haven't read this week's yet. So as soon as we're done recording, I'm curious to see what Monday Joe thought about this.
I came to a conclusion that I think, at least in my mind, makes sense. Something that I can live with that I hope is, I don't know if it's, how can I say that it's the right one?
Yeah.
But I went into this part where governments are established by God, because we know it says that. Paul says that. Governments are established by God, and you will be punished if you don't. Let everyone be subject to the governing authorities. For there is no authority except which God has established. The authorities that exist have been established by God. So all the authorities.
Yeah.
Now, here's what I'm going to go to. Here's why I started with this. I said this before with you. If we were merely an organic swamp creature that was a cell that developed or whatever, however, you could go through creation, you could go through whatever. But I'm looking at it from Rousseau and other philosophers, Western philosophers, who believed that we just happened. If we were that, and we were just these organic temporary bodies who lived for a while and died, and we were the champions of the survival of the fittest game, we would really, you and I would have no understanding of good and evil. We would have nothing to base good on. So we would basically only know that which allowed me to survive, to keep surviving. And being good to you doesn't fit into that realm. So we are born, I believe, with the laws of God in our hearts. We don't know them until he presents them. But from the time of the Ten Commandments, from the time of the law given to Moses and the Israelites, to where it's filtered down now to all the laws that we have that are really kind of based on those, in a sense, then, God has ordained the authorities, because without God, we wouldn't even have those laws, because we wouldn't know good and evil. We wouldn't have the laws, and we wouldn't have had the laws we have today. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think I follow what you're saying. Because it's interesting, because each person has their own morality, but then ethics is a term that describes how my morality relates to your morality, and systems of morality that are assigned to a whole group of people. That's when it moves from morality to ethics. And government oftentimes is a collective that enforces that ethical code that says this is a good thing, it will be rewarded, this is a bad thing, it will be punished. And so if we know that our communal ethics come from the collection of individual morality, and that my individual morality comes from my creator, who is, imprinted that on my being, and no matter how many people we talk to, everyone has this conscience, everyone has this knowing of right and wrong, even if it varies a little between people and between circumstances. It always tends to majority line up, and that sense of guilt, or that sense of pride or insecurity, tends to always be there. Yeah, we attribute that to God. And so by the transitive property, it seems like the systems of government do come from God.
Yeah, I mean, that's the only way I could think of. He established it because he established authority.
I find it very interesting that when you're looking at specifically the exilic periods in the Old Testament, God uses other nations to punish his people who have strayed far away from him and strayed far away from righteous living. And you have some of the prophets like Joel that describe these enemy nations in this animalistic kind of way, describes them as hyenas or locusts that are going to come through and ravage the land, and that God has prepared them in advance to use them for this purpose. And I think at least the worldview of the Old Testament will look at these situations and look at these corrupt governments that are directly that are abusing people, that are enslaving people, that are taking their property, destroying their homes, and still say, yeah, that's to God's glory. That's a part of God's plan. So right. I think that worldview will take even the worst of those corrupt government situations and say, yeah, God's going to use it for something good.
But even in those corrupt governments, the governments that God used to wipe out or punish his people, even those governments had rules. Yeah, they had laws that the people in that government lived by.
Yeah, I mean, you think about I don't know what's the Mongol Empire under Genghis Khan is they were absolute conquerors. They destroyed, their empire grew. They destroyed their enemies. It's said that 1 out of every 5 Asian people, it has Genghis Khan's blood in them. The amount that he abused women and sounds super heinous, right? But there was also a lot of religious freedom under the Mongol Empire, and there was a lot of development of arts and culture that came after the warring and the conquering. So yeah, even the most oppressive, aggressive governments are not for the sake of death and destruction and punishment. They just say, it's peace through strength. So we'll be strong, we'll be forward so that we can have peace and prosperity.
Yes.
Yeah, I don't think that there's ever a government entity that is trying to strive for something bad. Even,
but they all get corrupt.
Absolutely. Our go-to example, if we want to take it to the extreme to test our theory, right? Nowadays, as we say, okay, what about 1940s Germany? Well, even with them, heinous, terrible, unforgivable things to just take away people's lives because they were born a certain way. But that was for the goal of having a more pure and prosperous nation. So the absolute most abhorrent evils, still with the goal of the betterment of Hitler's Germany.
Yeah.
So So
Not good.
No, like very, very bad things, a very perverted way of getting to what in their mind was a good thing.
Yeah.
And honestly, right, Adolf Hitler did not do it alone. He had armies of people who
Yes.
followed him, and he had to sell them on his vision.
Yes.
There was something good that they were clinging
Yes.
to that in their mind justified all of the atrocities. So yeah, even the most abhorrent of governments still have something good that they're working towards, even if they're going about it in the worst of ways.
Yes.
Yeah.
We are not to submit to government. Government is not supposed to be our God.
Yeah.
And okay, we know that the laws that have come down from Moses, the laws that came from God, were for the good of mankind. And those have been passed down. So when Paul says, submit to the authority, give in to the authority, obey the authority, because those are ordained. The laws essentially are ordained. So I came to the conclusion that we are to adhere to the laws of the government, even though the government may be corrupt, may be unjust, may be greedy, all the things that we know governments become. Absolute power corrupts absolutely.
Yes.
So individuals are different. Not everyone in our world, our country, is Christian. Not everyone believes in God.
Mm-hmm.
Some believe in evil. Some may be devil worshipers or Satan worshipers or whatever, I mean, people they come from different backgrounds, or they don't have any belief at all, and it's all me. So whatever's good for me is what's important. And if you have something I want, I'm going to take it. And I may take your life doing it. And that's okay, because I need it. So laws, then, in our government, if we strip everything away from the government, everything that they do, that all the stuff, but you just look at the laws and you say, I'm going to submit to laws. So the laws like speed limits, stop signs, stop lights, against robbery, against murder, against assault, etc., are necessary and should be adhered to for a society to function, and are directly related to right and wrong, good and evil, and ultimately God.
Yeah.
So I need to know what limit I have to drive under. I need to know that, or else it's chaos. I need to know which corner I'm going to stop at so that I don't fly into another car.
And anytime that you are choosing to submit to that law, you are voluntarily placing yourself under the authority of the government body that established that law.
Yes. And if the government needs tax money to pay for all these things that they do, putting up street signs, putting up these things, doing all this stuff, yes, then I owe it to them, living under those laws, to be able to support them so that the police could be there and everything, keep me safe. But that's here's what I came to, Josh, is this. That's the extent of my submission to the government. That's the extent of it. I am not, now, if they have a law that says you have to do 2 years of military service, that's a law. You have to do it. They don't have that now. But any law that is put together that does not, that is benign,
Mm-hmm.
none of those laws that I mentioned conflict with God's laws, with what I know God wants for me. God wants me to go speed limit. He wants me to stop at signs.
Yeah.
He wants me to not murder. He wants me to not rob somebody, steal somebody, not assault somebody. He would like me not to do those things.
When you strip it down to common sense, and you're talking to someone who's willing to have integrity and to be honest in the conversation, then I think we can come to this conclusion that you've presented. But I think you have some people that are so concerned, they're so reserved, they're so, I don't know, perhaps looking for a purpose in life, that they will oppose some of the common sense things that you said. You have people that would say, okay, yeah, you say that me having to wear a seatbelt and come to a complete stop before turning right, you say that those are for my own good, for my own safety. Well, I trust in God to keep me safe. And so if I'm submitting to these rules that are supposed to keep me safe, then I'm abandoning my trust in God.
Well, then that person's not really a godly person, because how could you think God's laws are so far above man's? If I care for you, if I am truly living in God, with God, and I'm completely submitted to God, a real God, not an idol or something like that, but a real God, the one true God. If I'm submitted to him, then I care about you.
Yeah.
My purpose then is to serve my God.
Yeah.
And it causes me to care and to love you.
Yes.
And so I won't go through a stop sign thinking that I might hit you.
Yes. I completely agree with you that based on my understanding, I think that's where the Christian ethic should lead people in their behavior. And so it has been discouraging or frustrating at times to see people that the train of logic doesn't lead them to that same conclusion.
Yeah.
Not to step on any toes, because it still seems relatively fresh, but when it came to like the COVID vaccine, and our government said, hey, this might cost you something, but it's for the greater good. It's for the safety of the people around you. We need you to participate in this. And people said, oh, but if I participate in that, I'm not trusting God anymore. I'm trusting God to keep me safe and keep other people safe. I'm not trusting the government and big pharma. And they saw them as opposed, rather than saying, oh yeah, that might cost me something. I might get sick. I might have a side effect. It's for the greater good of my community and for keeping other people around me safe. I'm going to submit to it.
Yeah. And that's tough, because it's a lack of trust. Because, I mean, ultimately, somebody who is following God knows who God is.
Yeah.
We also know who the government is. We also know that they can lie to you.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And so there's that, hey, you got to do this for the good. Oh, by the way, and we're locking you down. You got to stay in your house, close your windows, shut your blinds, and we don't know how long you're going to stay there.
Yeah.
That's kind of frightening.
Absolutely. There's an unknown that is with that. There's a restriction on my personal liberties, and we live in a government whose fundamental purpose is to protect individual liberties. Not every government across time has been that way by any stretch, but that is like a characteristic of the American government. And so to have such big restrictions on my personal liberties, and to hear, yeah, just trust us, when it seems like they don't. Well, if this is a brand new thing, how does the government know what the right answer is? And they were constantly revising their information, saying, hey, we had given this piece of advice. It's not the best advice, and so we're revising it. And you had people that said, see, you don't know what you're talking about. We can't trust the government. I can only trust God.
Right.
I'm going to do what I want. Rather than bring it all the way back into, yeah, okay, we get it. They're flawed. It's people. It's sinful people that are running my government. I'm a sinful person. It's terrible that they got this piece of information wrong. We could have been together sooner than we were, or whatever. it costs us something. It's a little frustrating. And I think that's why you have the language like Paul presents of submit and obey. It costs you something, but that's for the sake of the greater good.
Yeah. And in that case, I agree with you, because not everybody, it would be chaos living in the United States without laws. I've seen it. I saw it, and you've seen it, I'm sure, when you travel, but I saw it in Kenya.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you pull into a roundabout kind of thing, and you go into the city, and there's no lights, there's no stop signs. People are just flying.
Yeah.
NAFTA saw a guy get hit.
Yeah.
You know, there's people on motorcycles, on bikes, walking, cars. Nobody's obeying anything. You just squeeze in whenever you can. And it's chaos.
Yeah. They got plenty of personal rights and freedom.
Yeah.
But it doesn't necessarily make it for their good.
Yes. And then the police can stop you anytime, and they can stop you driving down the road. You could be going the speed limit, but they feel like they're going to stop you, and they're going to extract some money from you.
Yep.
You're going to pay an immediate fine, and it's probably for some police officer's birthday, but they have the authority to do that there. And so, you know, you look at our country with all the rules and regulations and speed limits, and people's, there's just too much, there's too much. But everybody comes from a different point of view. People are busy, and they're doing things, and so the law, the law telling us what to do, God's authority filtering down to the governments that he has established, are for that purpose, to protect us while we're here on this earth living.
Yeah.
The difference between a Christian, a person who has given their life to Christ, and anyone else is that we know we're here for a time. We want to be safe. We care about our fellow man. And so we will submit to that law because of the fact that we care for our fellow man, and because we see this as a fallen world of which we're going to be here for a time and then go on. And so it's not like, can you imagine somebody in this world who didn't believe in God, who was that person that I was talking to earlier, that it's all about me. I was once like this. I used to believe that, and every once in a while it comes back to me, but I used to believe the roads were mine.
Yeah.
I used to drive as if this is my road. You're a guest on it. Would you please speed up? Get out of my way. You're intruding on my road. Now, how ridiculous is that? But if we didn't have laws, if we didn't have a speed limit, that person like that, I would have been dangerous.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it is really helpful to use these examples like roads and traffic laws, because it's something that we can all, in general, agree is a good and productive thing. And it's a simple thing. I think that the conversation gets a lot messier, and that opinions get a lot more heated when you get into something like government programs, how they're run, who receives funding, what the requirements are for that funding, who is supplying that capital that's being redistributed, and how much they're required to contribute, and why not the same amount as that person. And there are definitely, I just don't want to have a conversation about, you know, our relationship to the government and only use those simple examples, because they are very helpful for helping us to get to the bottom line, without recognizing that, yes, there are definitely more complex situations, and that the more a society grows, the larger a government a government's reach gets, the more wealth that a society has to offer up to its government, the more programs are enacted and the more that they grow. And it gets a lot messier.
See, I don't want to get into that. I don't want to. I mean, the government says I have to pay this much taxes. Every year you pay this much taxes. I know I have to pay those taxes because I'm also told in that verse, consequently, whoever rebels against the authority is rebelling against what God instituted, and those that do so will bring judgment on themselves. So I know that if I don't pay those taxes, I will bring judgment on myself by the government.
Yeah.
But I don't have to like what they do with that money when they get it.
I think my wife Hannah gets really annoyed with me when it comes to like that season of the year, whether it's elections and we're voting on policies and we're voting to pass levies or not, we're voting for politicians and the plans that they plan to support or enact, and then also the time of year where we're paying our taxes, because I'm the kind of person who I have an opinion about it all. And I'll complain. I'll say, can you believe that they spent it this way, or they got rid of this program, but they kept this one? Can you believe that? And then ultimately comes down to the end, and I'm a pacifist, and so I'm going to submit to whatever is presented to me.
Right.
And so we sort of have the same conversation every time, where she says, "Well, it just is what it is." I'm like, I know.
Well, and there's a fine line there, because if my government, let's use Germany again for this. You know, when Hitler came into power, they all loved him. He was building roads. He built the Autobahn. He did all kinds of stuff. He was rebuilding buildings. He brought the economy back. People were working again.
Volkswagen.
Yeah. People were working. They were doing things. There was prosperity. Then all of a sudden things started creeping in. Signs on Jewish stores. People disappearing, all the different propaganda and everything else. It was a slow creep of people's rights and what they were seeing happening. And it was so gradual that it was like a frog boiling.
Yeah.
You look at that, and it was so gradual that all of a sudden they were in the middle of it, and they were complicit. They were part of it. They were part of everything that happened, and they couldn't deny it. And then you get to a point where oh well. So we do have a point where we have to submit to the laws. We can fight against the laws that are unjust. If there's a law that somebody brings in the United States and says, we're going after Italians. Italians can't work these certain jobs. Now you start getting into things as Christians. And Dan talked about this. He talked about Bonhoeffer in Germany. And Bonhoeffer ended up getting killed. Ended up getting hung. Like 3 days or a week or so before the war ended.
Yeah.
But he was constantly fighting against the government.
Yeah.
And was thrown in jail because of it.
Yeah, and his situation is not unique. His perspective on a Christian's participation in government, their submission versus their civil disobedience versus outright, he ended up getting to the extreme of being a part of planning the assassination, right? And so his personal view had spanned this whole spectrum, but it was most significantly changed because of his time spent in Harlem, New York. And he saw the Black church's response to the civil rights, the segregation of the civil rights movement in the United States. And he said, oh, here's a group of people that are not willing to back down on the thing that they know is right. And they are not going to compromise what they know to be good and true. And they're going to represent Jesus well, while still fighting for equal rights.
Oh, and by the way, they're going to be punished.
Yeah.
They're going to experience hardship.
Yeah.
Because of it.
Yes. And so Bonhoeffer is a great example that we can look back to now, but even he was inspired by others who were inspired by others. And this has been something that we've seen through numerous governments, through numerous eras in humanity across different cultures, is people are always trying to strike that balance between fighting for what's right and not fighting for selfish gain, not compromising what you know to be good and true in the midst of the fight.
And always God's law, God's submitting to God trumps everything else. And living for God trumps everything else. So I looked at that, and here, this is actually my takeaway from this. And I used to be a political animal. I was crazy over it. But God tells me to love him and love my neighbor. The Holy Spirit places that love in our hearts. And it's hard to comprehend sometimes when you love people so much who aren't your blood. So that love allows me to live an unselfish, compassionate, and caring life. This is the role of the government. It provides me the specifics I need to practically carry out that love and compassion.
Yeah.
That's my definition of submitting to government.
I think that's a good one.
And that's it.
Yeah.
So it's like, I don't want my government to spend money on things that are against God. But I also realize I have to pay my taxes. And if I'm living here, some of that tax money is going to go to things that are against God. If I could fight to remove those and elect people that will remove those, great. But I see government now. I don't love my government. And that may sound that may sound terrible to so many people who are watching this. I'm grateful for where I live.
Yes.
I'm grateful to be an American. I love the history of this country. I love everything about the country. I don't love the government. I do not. I've said often, I don't like politicians. I love public servants.
Yeah.
I love people who are true public servants. So I am not, oh, the government is everything. I've lost the Republican Party, the Democratic Party, the liberals and conservatives. Throw all that out. I don't want any of those labels. I am a Christian man. My life is buried in Christ. My life has risen with Christ. The government allows me to carry out the specifics practically to live a loving, caring life for my fellow man. That's the extent of I don't want to go any further. I don't want to go any further. I don't want to take it any further. And I hate watching, I'm off social media, I have been. I hate watching the news. So that, in that sense, I'm submitting to government. I'm obeying Romans 13, but I'm more so living Romans 12.
Yeah.
And when I wrote this, and we are to submit to the authority of our government, but not place it above or equal to the authority of God. When earthly governmental authority crosses the line from practical living guidelines into trying to usurp the authority of God, we have no choice but to disobey. We have no choice, accepting that we may pay the price that many have. God's law is supreme, and he is the only one who can demand complete and total submission. So we may, in our lifetime, have to make that choice of this has stopped, this has stopped being practical ways of living peacefully in society and is now crossing over to harming one aspect of our society, one people, one group. Let's take LGBTQ, tough subject. I don't think that any group of people should get special attention. Every group should get attention, but we are called to love our brothers and sisters. We are not called to love sin, and we are called to call sin, but we are not called to hate. When our government crosses over into the area of condoning sin, we have to stand up to that without hating the sinner. Does that make sense? I mean, I know I don't want people judging me. If people judge me, they're going to judge me as a sinner.
Yeah.
But there is, I don't think it's a government's responsibility to take one group of people and say, we have to do this. I remember somebody, who was it? Denzel Washington, or they asked him about Black History Month and everything. And he said, I don't think there should be. And he said, well, what do we do about racism? He said, stop talking about it. Stop talking about it. The government can harm things by trying to do too much. Does this all make sense? Am I off on a real big tangent here?
No. I think what you're saying is going to relate to a lot of the people who are watching or listening to this. Ultimately, these issues are tricky and come down a lot to discernment and personal involvement. I think it's always fascinating to see the way someone will talk about, continuing with this example, the way someone will talk about policies related to queer and trans people, and how someone talks with a friend or family member who is queer or trans. And I think that that's an important thing, is that sometimes when we look at policies, we have this abstract idea of who a group of people is, or what their intentions are, or how they live. And then when you meet individuals from that group, they may defy your expectations.
Mm-hmm.
And that may change the way that you even interact with policies regarding the broader group in general.
Yeah.
So
but there's a government's role to do that. That's the point I'm getting at.
Yeah.
If you're gay and I get to know you as a person, and I'm a Christian person, because and the only reason I bring that up, I don't throw that Christian term out like, oh, I'm good. I throw it out because I'm changed.
Yeah.
But I love you and I care for you. I may not condone what you do.
Yeah.
But I care for you, and I could become close to you and friends with you. When the government gets involved and says you must get along with this person, that's what I'm talking about what government should not do.
I think that makes sense, in that, a governing body is meant to protect us. That's the sort of fundamental you've got to, that they set up laws that protect my ability to live a flourishing life and to love people and to love God, as well as in some situations providing supplemental opportunities or resources for me to live a flourishing life and to love God and to love other people. And I think that sometimes it can be a little frustrating when someone else has provided opportunities or resources for them to live a flourishing life, love God, and love others, and I'm not provided those same resources and or opportunities, and it can feel frustrating to me. And I can say my tax dollars are going to provide this opportunity to platform this person or their cause or their business, and not me or mine. And that can be a frustrating place. And so when it comes to back to this example of like gay and queer rights, when you cross from protecting the rights of those individuals to providing platforms and opportunities and resources to those people, I think the same sort of thing can be like, man, that feels really unfair. And I think the idea that's being platformed doesn't line up with what I think is good. And so it can get very frustrating. It can feel very unfair. And so I think that is what leads a lot of people to the sentiment that they have today, and why it's such a hot button issue.
It's not so much fairness and financial, but more of our government intruding into what should be just relationships.
Yeah.
In other words, if I am pushed to do something, if I am told I must do something, and if I don't,
yeah,
then I'm labeled something.
Yeah.
That is where government has no right to be.
Yeah.
In my mind, government has a right to establish laws and rules
Yeah.
that allow everyone to be safe and to have a chance to live a good life, a happy life, whatever.
Yeah.
Because I like the government. See, the government should provide I think, a safety net for people.
Mm-hmm.
The government should not, however, pick winners and losers.
Yeah.
The government should not intrude into what a personal relationship looks like.
Yeah. I mean, you would open up this conversation with talking about your personality being a natural rebel. Mm-hmm. And you're certainly not alone in that. There's a lot of people that feel that way. I'm definitely that way. And so I think that when I have an authority telling me that I have to act a certain way, I have to prefer a certain product, I have to dress a certain way, I have to celebrate, a certain way, I get frustrated. I'm like, why? I shouldn't have to. Whether that governing body is my mom and dad when I was a kid, or the school I went to, or my job, or my government, or my church, like I'm immediately like, what? Well, why? Maybe I want to do it differently. Even when there's not necessarily a point for me to do that, that's just like my natural inclination. And so, yeah, when it comes to relations between people, whether it's individuals or broader people groups, I don't think that governing bodies saying, hey, you have to get along, that will never be a successful plan.
But they keep doing it.
Because people will push back. The reason why I might advocate for it in certain applications, certain circumstances, is that there are some individuals or groups of people, classes of people, for which it does not naturally resolve. And then it feels like we need some authority to step in and help it to happen.
But you know what? Here's my thought. And it only got to that point because the government got involved. Had we, and yes, there are people who aren't never going to have a relationship with a gay or a lesbian person. Mm-hmm. There are people who will never have a relationship with an Italian person. Mm-hmm. There are people who will never have a relationship with a Christian person until maybe they are face to face with that person or come in contact with that person for some reason.
Yeah.
But as soon as the government gets involved, as soon as the government starts labels, and part of the whole thing is this: they keep they keep expanding the label. It just keeps getting bigger. It's like, Italian American, and I'm Italian American, I'm Italian American plus LAB, I don't want to you keep doing that. You keep getting involved. You keep pushing the agenda and forcing it on people. There's a natural rebellion.
Yeah.
That isn't, and so we got to this because I was talking about where we spend our money and stuff and what our government does. And I told you that my feelings are now that I submit to government rules and laws that are good for my fellow man and me.
Yeah.
That allows me to live my life in the Lord practically.
Yeah.
Those parts of government that are trying to enact social justice, to me, are not necessary. To me, are outside the boundaries of what I have to submit to an authority. Does that make sense? Now, because I want justice for people. I want my Black brothers and sisters to be treated equally. I want them to have opportunities. It sounds so cliche, but I coached, I played college football. I don't see that.
Mm-hmm.
So it's natural for me to want that, but it's not natural for me to always talk about it because it's supposed to just be.
Yeah.
And it's the same thing with all relationships with people. Government cannot do that. The opposite side of the coin was Nazi Germany saying Jews are evil and we have to wipe them out. You can also go too far the other way and say, this people's a protected people, and if you don't like it, you're bad. You're evil. We'll throw you in jail. We'll label you a bigot. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, no, I get what you're saying. We have some issues, so some particular circumstances where the government steps in order to protect the safety of an individual, and it might not come across to everyone who observes it or even all the participants in it that safety is on the line. And so it can be like, it would feel really silly if Ohio said, hey, during Black History Month, you can only shop at Black-owned businesses. I'd get super fat off of like nothing but cakes. Like there's some really good like Black businesses around here. So I think I'd kind of enjoy it, but it would feel very weird. It would be like frustrating. It'd be like, why are you telling me I have to? But when the government provides additional protections for those businesses, it can also feel like that's sort of what they're pushing, right? They're saying, oh, yeah, you should, like, we care about these businesses more, so we're providing additional protections for them. And that can feel, icky to me. It feels, it might feel particularly icky to me because I'm like, what's the difference between that business and another small business, a Black-owned business, or an Italian or Pakistani-owned business? What's the difference between them? Why are you protecting the one? It can seem weird to me, but there are people who are not okay with it. There are people who don't have my Christian convictions, who would hurt Black business owners, who would vandalize their business.
It happens, yeah.
And so by providing those additional protections, the government is providing a safety for them. And so from my perspective, it might seem like, wow, just you're like giving preferential treatment, that's not cool. But I might not have all the information, or you know what I'm saying? It can be a safe, they're protecting their rights. They're providing protection for them that can just seem like something unfair to me.
I get that, but that is relational. Is the government's role to get into relationships?
I don't think that when an authority tells you have to get along, I don't think that'll ever work. But if the authority tells you, hey, you are not allowed to hit them, like when the teacher says, yeah, Tom and Emerson, you have to be friends. Well, that's not going to work. But if the teacher says, Emerson, you have to stop punching Tom, like that's a necessary thing for that teacher to do.
But that's common sense for anybody.
Absolutely.
That's a law for anybody. If I punch you.
Absolutely. And so then when you hit more hot button things like race related or gay and queer businesses, individuals, groups of people, that's when that sort of like common sense we can all agree with then sort of goes by the wayside. People will go out of their way to hurt gay and queer people or their businesses or their platforms.
And we've seen that.
And that's not okay. And so for an authority, for the government to say, hey, there are protections for them, you can't do that, that's a good thing. It's not going to make those people like each other.
Yeah. And ultimately I'm in, I don't know how to wrap this up kind of. Yeah. I'm just saying, I look at government now as being a narrow scope, probably the scope that it was intended by our founding fathers, to protect the people, to create laws that protect and allow us to live in harmony.
Yeah.
Allow us to live in harmony by the laws that they create, and not to go any further than that.
Yeah.
I like to think, and I'm being very naive in my old age here, is I like to think that there was a time in our country when all these things, there was cruelty. There were things that happened down south and stuff. But there were also, in the neighborhood I grew up in North Akron, there were also blacks and whites and Polish and everybody always at my house playing basketball.
Heck yeah. Yeah.
Coming in the house, eating, hanging out. There was never any, there was not that. It wasn't until the government started saying it. It's almost like the 10 Commandments bring sin.
Yeah. Yes.
There wasn't a problem until people started saying there was a problem. Now, I realize there was a problem in certain parts of the country, and there was a lot of bigoted people, even in North Akron, probably. But for the most part, we lived in harmony, and we were brothers and sisters living together.
I tend to believe in the good of people.
Yeah.
And it's frustrating having 24-hour national news. And now, I have TikTok in my pocket, so I have 24-hour global news. So I see these terrible things that are happening all the time, everywhere. And like, if I only read my local paper, I would think that the world is such a nice, happy-go-lucky place. But I'm constantly bombarded by these terrible kidnappings and murders and hate crimes and war crimes happening all over the world. I think you're right that sometimes when an authority figure gets involved, what they're doing is they're platforming the issue by calling it out. Sometimes they're making people aware who weren't aware and shining a spotlight on it that is making it more problematic in ways.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so when we all live for a purpose, we all look for a purpose, we all look for meaning. The meaning's either going to be in us, and we're going to create our own purpose, which is to get what I get, to look after number one. That's my purpose. Or you're going to have a purpose that is in government, is in your country, is in your group that you're in, your gang, your whatever, or you're going to have a purpose in God. And so in order to live in harmony, we've got to have rules. But as Christians, I don't know how I lived before my relationship with God.
Yeah.
Because it's just chaos. You just keep filling that hole. Yeah. I need more. I need more entertainment. I need more money. I need more this. And that takes precedence. Feeding the beast takes precedence over everything.
Yeah.
I wish we could I don't even know how to end this, Josh. I mean,
It's a big conversation, and it relates to so much of our lives, yet so little. Like, it doesn't really have that big of an impact, but it actually has a big impact on a lot of things. It's a hard conversation to come to a conclusion on. I think it's why you have a lot of churches, why you have a lot of church podcasts and resources that avoid the subject entirely, because it's not something you can put a neat bow on. And I don't think that that's the appropriate response. I think it's something worth talking about. I think it's something worth exploring and how it impacts our lives. But ultimately, it just comes down to surrounding yourself with a community, being in the scriptures, being in prayer in your relationship with God. And that will give you the wisdom, that will give you the discernment to know how to respond in whatever specific situation you find yourself in. And it feels like a boring answer, but I feel like it's sort of this answer that we come to a lot on this podcast is just like, focus on your relationship with God.
Yeah, man.
Be in community, be in scriptures, be in prayer, and the Spirit will guide you.
And when you do that, you get the right perspective on what government is.
Yeah.
And how to submit to that government. And that's really the ultimate thing. And that's kind of the answer to everything we've been talking about is, you can't have a right relationship with government until you have a right relationship with God.
Yeah.
As hard as that seems. Boy.
It's almost like Jesus said that all the other laws, all the commandments hang on these things.
Yes.
Yeah. So that's what it comes back to, man. Love God, love others. Just focus on that.
Well, I hope you made it through this. It became like I forgot you guys were even there.
Oh, yeah. We're recording this, right?
Zach's going, what is going on here? You want to close us out?
Yeah. We want to thank you guys for watching and listening. Joe said it at the beginning, but I'm going to bring it back now. If you're watching us on YouTube, if you could give the video a like, a comment, subscribe, ring the bell for notifications. Any one of those clicks helps us out. It helps get this video out to more people. But you want to stay in the loop to always catch the latest episode that's coming out. If you're listening on Apple or Spotify, if you could give this video or give our channel a follow, give it a review, and pass this podcast along to someone else, right? It's not hard. Hit that share button, find someone in your text, pass it along to someone and be like, hey, what do you think about this? It's always great to keep these conversations going. We know that's important to not just have life, but to be life. Thank you again for watching and listening, and we'll see you next time.